Can everyone hear me?
Can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Alec, and everyone for attending this. My name is Rushi Purohit. Sorry, just nailing a little bit, lot of controls here, trying to set this up properly. Okay. All right, okay. Yeah, so thanks everyone. We will obviously now be focusing the conversation on CWE top 25 most dangerous software weaknesses and our plans for the future and the collaboration that we're
Rushi, sorry to interrupt. Your voice is pretty faint. Could you speak up or give a more solid signal? Thank you.
Okay, well, let's try this. Is this clearer?
I think that's better.
That sounds good. Yep.
A little better. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to speak up for sure and raise my volume and other things. But yeah, so let's dive in. Quick overview about me is I've been working on CWE for a few years now, and as primarily recently I've had the opportunity to be the technical lead for CWE Top 25, as well as the CWE mapping guidance efforts, which I'm pleased to be given the opportunity for. And as we've started to recognize, there's a lot of momentum around these topics, and we definitely want to hear from all of you and the rest of the community to find ways to collaborate on this efforts together and really get to a common ground which will provide a good good set for everyone involved. A few other things I've had the opportunity to be involved in, deal with the various application security in the software assurance, doing secure code review, vulnerability analysis management, threat modeling, and software security research. And one of the key things I really admire about the CWE, KPAC, CWE, and some of the other projects that we have at MITRE is the diversity of thought and true collaboration nature that we bring, the community engagements such as this to bear and really benefit and work in the public interest. So I'm really excited to be part of this. So one thing before I jump in, I cannot see the questions or anything. So someone please chime in if someone has any questions.
Rushi, I was just suggesting that you're still a little quiet, so not sure how to help with that, but I think it's difficult.
So if I try to get rid of this.
Please try again, Rushi.
Now, yeah, I don't think we can hear anything now.
Please continue speaking, Rushi, so we can tell.
Okay. Yes. Sounds good.
Better. Much better.
Yeah, much better.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Sorry for the technical glitches. All right. So I think just please feel free to speak up and any questions or comments you have, and I'll try to moderate appropriately. Okay, so I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists for the top 25 session. So I'll begin with Jeremy Bellay, who's from Battelle. Jeremy and our teams recently started collaborating as, obviously we, as the CW team, have been maintaining and producing the top 25 list for a few years now. And Jeremy and his team are also working on some automation with CVE, CWE, and so that's how we started collaborating. But I'll pause and I'll let Jeremy introduce himself further.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Yeah, my name is Jeremy Bellay, and I've actually come to CVE and CWE from the direction from hardware security, which is, I think, very interesting in that when I started looking at it a couple of years ago, there was very little attention paid to hardware, and now I feel there's quite a bit of attention paid to hardware, and it's very active and very excited in that direction. And so it's been exciting to see it evolve towards hardware, and it's also been interesting. I think all of the issues that have been talked about this morning, I think are again getting played out in kind of in new variations as we try to understand how hardware weaknesses should be addressed, and how things like the top 25, if we can do it in CWE, can we relate it to how would that look in for hardware associated weaknesses, which have sort of a different flavor from the software versions. But I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yep, pleasure to have you. And next, I'll turn over to Chris Turner. But before I do, I just want to mention that since we did our 2019 top 25 list, Chris and my team have been working closely since obviously we're pulling directly from NVIDIA CWE data. So we've built a great collaboration efforts together, and we have further plans to improve our processes, for top 25 and other avenues that will lead into that. So Chris, over to you. Please share a few things about yourself.
All right. So glad to be here. So I'm Chris Turner. I'm the analysis team lead for the National Vulnerability Database. I've been doing that for about, I want to say, started as an analyst like maybe 5 years, and I've kind of just been working through all sorts of different things such as CVSS, CWE, etc. Obviously, because of the work that NVD does on a consistent basis, we're very interested in CWE and trying to make it, trying to leverage it as best as we can and improve the kind of information and the quality of the information that we're able to provide for CVE records. So like I said, we just have a pretty big interest in this, and over the time I've at least been at the NVD, we've been working to really increase the not just the we'll say the accuracy or precision of the information we offer, but also to increase the corpus of CWE that we provide. Initially, it was only, I think, 19 different CWE entries that we provided, and since then we've kind of iterated and moved on, getting closer to a better selection from that point. Which has resulted through the coordination with the CWE team with the 1003 view. So pretty happy about the way that's turned out, and looking forward to continue iterating on that as we go forward.
Yeah, I think just to touch on that point quickly, as Chris mentioned that we originally had only 19 weaknesses within the 1003 view, and currently it's at 127 weaknesses that's available to the community or folks who are interested in mapping to CWE. It's still a subset, but it's an evolving subset that we constantly seek feedback and find ways to improve. So if you have any ideas on or there are CWs that you think are relevant to your needs but aren't currently part of View 1003, please reach out and we'd be happy to work with you in incorporating those. So with that said, I have a few themes that we'll be focusing our discussion around. And the idea with this is to really, get to, just start the dialogue, but then get the rest of you to engage in this discussion and provide your unique perspectives or any issues you're encountering on your end, and just hear from you. And if there are opportunities for us to further collaborate on this, to find some common solutions, that'd be fantastic. So. Here are just a few things. I'll quickly be just for level set purposes going through what top 25 is and how we evolved it, and then we can dive into the specific discussion topics. So if anyone has anything to add or mention, just I'll start the dialogue with the panelists, and then we can get any questions from the audience. So that said, I think everyone's pretty much on the call is aware of what Top 25 is and what it's represented and is representing. So just for quick overview, it is a demonstrative list of the most common and impactful issues that are occurring in the wild out there, right? And the way we've approached this for the past 2 years is we've been focusing on pretty much 2 calendar years of CVEs within NVD, and then using doing some analysis on that, as well as CVS scores associated with the CVEs, and then just determining that based on the prevalence, severity, and some additional criteria that we've categorized in our methodology section. So that's the current model that we're following. But as most of you are also aware that when we started out, the first top 25 list in 2009 up until 2011, those were primarily constructed out of surveys, personal interviews with developers, top security analysts, researchers, and vendors, right? So and then additional analysis was done in producing the top 25, but also the top 41 list that you saw. So since we've made this shift, and tried to be very data-driven in our recent methodology, and we plan to continue that. But we're also interested in hearing if you have other better ideas that we could be also considering to improve our processes. We'd love to discuss that further. So that said, I'll now just to get the discussion going, I'll start with Jeremy. Jeremy, please, can you please share how Battelle uses CWE and or CWE Top 25?
We do a lot of vulnerability research, and so it was interesting to me talking to, and so I'm in the Battelle's hardware security group, and maybe I guess a year ago, and I started talking with our software security group and talking about how essential CWE was for their research in understanding like where they could they're doing a lot of red teaming for government and trying to find places where there might be an unforeseen vulnerability, and in using the weaknesses that are present in CWE, and especially like the examples and snippets, that sort of thing, but it was really key to their process. And so I think that our view has been of really looking at the more detail, the better. And it's been interesting to see, again, going back to these kind of the previous discussion about the mapping issues, and trying to understand how those, one of the things that came up with the engineers that I was talking with immediately was, again, like, looking at what was being mapped, in the publicly available data from NVD and how that mapping was being done. And then within their own groups, making sure that they were talking about the same thing when they were doing their mapping, that fine grain level of detail. And so I think that almost immediately as we started looking into CWE for hardware and understanding how it works in hardware, we immediately encountered like sort of the mapping issues and how they relate to publicly available data. So on the other hand, looking at the top 25, I think that I don't think that most of the hardware weaknesses are quite new, and as we start to think about how they would be prioritized in something like a top 25 list, it's been very interesting to think about the how hardware and the weaknesses that hardware stakeholders care about are often kind of different from the software equivalents. And so I think that I'm not saying that there aren't analogous structures between hardware and software, but for example, I think a lot of the emphasis on hardware is in the design phase and prior to production, because once the hardware is out there, it's very difficult to go back and patch and mitigate. Whereas, I mean, I think most of the role of historically with software is this report and then patching cycle, which is difficult to do with hardware. And so that being said, it's kind of on a slower timescale. I mean, again, people are interested in making sure that these are preventative and best practices during design. And then also people are very interested in supply chain issues. And so, for example, making sure that their design is not being stolen, or that that their design isn't being counterfeited. And so I mean, again, these are issues for software as well. But I think that they play somewhat a larger role. And I think that putting them into a general framework with software might be difficult, simply because on one hand, having the design of your device stolen by some competitors of great consequence to the company, but compared to having a large scale exploit available or backdoor in software, I mean it would be very difficult to kind of compare those two. And so I wonder if going forward with CWE top 25, especially in the hardware context, if we could use sort of the kind of a templated approach towards different roles. And I think this is something that Joe was bringing up earlier in the day about looking at how we could score things and how we could look at, for example, during design might be something that we might want to look at weaknesses during design, and simply because it's very difficult to compare those contexts to the the sheer severity of vulnerabilities and weaknesses in software. So
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, there you go, perfect. Chris, over to you. Can you also please share your thoughts on how NIST and NVD particularly is using CWE and top 25?
Yeah, so I think most of the people on this call are probably aware, part of the NVD's typical daily operations is as CVE entries are published to the CVE list, the NVD then provides, CVSS reference tags and CPEs, and then of course CWEs for every CVE that gets published. It's just a part of our policy that we try to have at least one CWE that is relevant for each CVE entry to kind of fill that gap, because otherwise, there may not be a CWE there, and we're trying to assist with that categorization effort across the CVE corpus. I kind of alluded to this already, but originally we were using about 19 CWE entries. They were a mix of, categories and some weakness bases, but we've since kind of learned to understand CWE better since that time, which led towards the first and then now second iteration of the 1003 view, which is now much more in line with today's practices and expectations with CWE. To Joe's point, while it is a subset of the entire CWE corpus, the goal of the 1003 view was to have something that was digestible for folks that may be either new to CWE or simply not able to be completely aware of every CWE within the CWE dictionary, but to still cover the largest, still provide coverage rather for most of the weaknesses that are published in public vulnerabilities. Typically, we tend to have some issues where we would like to provide something that's a little bit more specific, and in those cases, we will end up using the higher level entities that are present within the 1003 view, if that is appropriate. But other times we do not do that, and in fact, we will specifically make a note on the CVE record that states, we believe that this CWE is most appropriate. It's not within the 1003. We'll label it as CWE other, and still provide that. And the reason that's useful is because it allows for this continual iteration on the 1003 view to find out what instances of CWEs are, coming into demand one of the things that happens with CVE in general is there tends to be a lot of publications that revolve around easier identified vulnerabilities, such as buffer overflows or stack overwrites, cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, and it can take a while for that better detailed CWE data to bubble up. For instance, I would say back in maybe 2015, use after freeze weren't super commonly reported, at least not in that level of detail. But as time has gone forward, things like that do get more commonly reported, and those things become needed, and we start to add those to the subsets of CWE that we use today. So as far as how NVD uses that, we kind of use it in an academic format where we're trying to provide the categorizations as best we can based off the information that's available, but continue to iterate off of that list so that it strikes the appropriate balance between usability and entry-level ability for, say, less mature organizations that are trying to get into it kind of as a starting point. And then we don't necessarily use the CWE top 25, at least within the scope of NVD, but the information through collaboration with the CWE team is what's used to generate the top 25.
Yep, well said. So just to piggyback on one of the finer points of the View 1003, as Chris alluded, it is an evolving view, right? And it has grown in size while still being very usable and relevant to entry-level folks to easily navigate and identify appropriate issues within that. So we're continuing to strive in that direction. But one of the things, as indicated, with the ability to be able to map to a very precise level and still not lose that information, the way we've been tracking to that internally, but also with Chris and his team at NIST, and we ask others to also share this data with us if that's possible, is over time, as you're seeing certain things come up from a weakness standpoint, please share that information with us, and we'll look at it, whether that's available in 1003 View or not, and if that's like very prevalent and something that needs to be added, we'll definitely consider adding it. So that's how we're staying relevant and continue to monitor what's happening out there and adapt as we need to. So,
right, and to expand on that a little more, one of the other cases that we come across is also when, say, NVD analysts, because of the scale that we work on, when we run into issues where we're noticing, a lot of association. To use a really easy example of, back when we used to use categories, a lot of this times where we use a lot of category association due to, we'll say the level of information that's available at the time. It also, things like that get used to kind of find possible gaps in CWE, where maybe there is only the ability to associate something that is relatively high level because we don't have the best CWE to use or one available to use for that specific case, whether it be for information's sake or just lack of availability. I think we've identified, a lot of that is in access controls, permissions issues, and information disclosures would be some of the areas where we've noticed there's some room for improvement, and that's just due to that type of academic mapping activity and research that's been done based off of the corpus of information in the NVD.
Yep, and the information disclosure point, right? We recently created a bunch of children under that CW 200 of information exposure just to be able to cover those gaps that were identified through the top 25 analysis that we performed. So yeah, so absolutely. So let's continue on and focus the conversation now on some of the benefits or perceived benefits of the CWE Top 25, as well as the limitations it could bring for your organizations or your customers. So I'll start with Jeremy.
Quick comment, Rushi. You have a hand up. Alex has his hand up, so I just want to make you aware that people may have some questions. So.
And please feel free to I can't see sadly who has their hands up. So if you would like to touch on that, I think that's fine. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. Twofold, part for you, Rushi, and part for the panelists. Have you started looking at having context-sensitive CWE top 25s? And what I mean by that is CWEs associated with CVEs are going to only cover what have vulnerability disclosures for, right? So if you look at the CVE database, there's a bunch of CVEs disclosed related to mobile applications, right? So Android apps, iOS apps, so on and so forth. And those are going to have potentially very different sets of vulnerabilities than, say, web servers, right? So is there enough information collected in terms of metadata in the MVD to create families of applications and components to give CVE related CWE top 25s for domains? So that's the question.
So from CWE side of things, we have started to ponder that idea, and we are, thinking about how we would create different top 25 lists, as you said, for particular domains or technology or languages. And there are certain things on CWE side that we can do to get that type of information more automated through applicable platform fields that we have within CWE. And we've recently created filter views and other things like that. So we would be able to, if we had appropriate data, we would be able to parse that in a good way and automate that to provide that level of coverage. But we've simply just started to touch on that idea. I don't know if NVD contains that level of information. That's something I need to determine further. But Chris, perhaps you're aware of that, and if so, then that's definitely something we can look into.
Yeah, so just speaking for NVD side of things, for broadly, you might be able to determine some of that by doing some clever data analysis on the product CPE entries for each CVE, but it would involve it would be a pretty heavy lift. We've discussed providing this type of like domain-based information for CVEs before. And we haven't made a decision to go one way or another simply because of the resourcing concerns, because it would be even if we started doing it now, we'd still need to go back retroactively to everything to get a better view. So it's not something that we've ruled out necessarily, but it's not something we're necessarily planning to do immediately either. But we do see the need, or at least the use case for that kind of data and how it can contextually be used in a lot of different ways.
Thank you both.
And that's something that we're also going to touch into the next question with the CW Top 25 future and what we can do to evolve it and provide more benefits.
Rushi, I guess you can't see, I've got my hand up, but this is Joe Jarsenbeck. I'd recommend that you go back and look at what we did, so that you're not totally reinventing the wheel, but look at what we did with the common weakness risk analysis framework, where we created vignettes based on using different types of technologies for a deployed environment. Meaning, if you're looking at medical devices, you're going to have we've already talked about other mobile devices. Those vignettes will naturally collect a set of CWEs that are most relevant. So you start with a subset because of the relevancy. I highly recommend you go back and look at that. Steve Christie did a lot of work with us on that. It's on the website, so you readily.
No,
Yeah, under
Absolutely. And Steve is still our, that guru's me supporting this project. So he's involved in all things CWE. So absolutely. Yeah. So coming back, I think Jeremy, we can come to you and then start the discussion on, the benefits and limitations.
Well, first of all, I do think that that's a really interesting question that Alex was asking. And I think that it's really exactly what Joe was saying, which is that I think, for a lot of these categories, it's hard to compare apples and oranges in, when you're trying to make a list and you do a prioritized list. And depending on who the stakeholder is, whether they are, some sort of auditing, working on auditing capacity, or whether they are a developer, or whether they are a manufacturer, or where they are. I mean, their concerns are going to be quite different. And so I think that being able to provide, lists for whether it's mobile or whether it's manufacturer, or that are somewhat contextualized, I think would be a great help. Especially since it's just very hard to compare, sort of a white hot, truly remotely exploitable vulnerability with, something that's more specific. It's still very important to someone who's looking at a given field. So I feel like that would be a very interesting place for us to expand into. And that common weakness risk analysis framework would be a good place to play there. And yeah, so I think in terms of our views on it, I guess I think that the data-driven approach has been a good one. But that being said, I think for some of these like more nascent areas, we do need to still rely on expertise, simply because we're just not going to get the number of CVEs associated with some important but underreported areas. And I think this is especially true. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't really want to speak for the hardware field, but especially for hardware, people a lot of times are a little bit more reticent on reporting vulnerabilities. But we still need to be able to understand what are important weaknesses, even if the underlying CVEs are lacking support in their reporting numbers.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I've jumped the slide since this is the discussion we're having. I think we can continue on this and then go back to the other topic. So I think that's fine. Is there anything else, Jeremy, you'd like to add on to this topic?
Not on this one. So can I address the next slide that I see in front of me now?
I'm sorry, say again?
Oh, could I address the slide in front of us right now that you this other slide, or should we intro into that first?
No, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think this is something that we've been very interested in, and we this idea of and I again, it goes back to this discussion of the importance of formalisms and ontology in the structure of CWE, and especially in its relation to the other parts of that ecology, including especially things like KPEC. But on the one hand, what are these? When we have a structure, what can we get out of it? And I think that the evolution of AI and ML in this space, and natural language processing sophistication, which has really blossomed the last couple of years, has kind of changed the way that we might want to view this to some degree. And so, for example, I think that the taxonomic structures, have a lot of value for humans when we're making decisions, we're going down those chains and trying to find, a specific category within a subcategory. And, we can organize it in terms of the way that we've been taught and the way that we think. But I wonder about how, how those will interact with use cases that might be, when we're trying to, use those in a machine learning or an AI environment. And simply because those devices, if they're trained on a pretty wide set of data, they might have a difficult time interpreting like these human-derived structures. On the other hand, I think that those formal structures can be really valuable when you're looking at other human-derived knowledge. So, for example, if we're taking the CWE hierarchy and then trying to say, okay, well, here's an example of a vulnerability description where we've found written somewhere. Where does it go in that hierarchy? And again, because we're mapping sort of a human-generated text to a human understood hierarchy or human understood kind of pseudo-ontology. I think it can be very helpful in informing that natural language process in terms of where that should go. And then on top of it, that having those kinds of structures can allow us to get at these corner cases which are generally underreported and we might not have a lot of training data for. And so, I mean, we worked with MITRE, with you, in particular Rushi, in trying to look at this initially. And, we found kind of, both cases where on one hand, sort of the modern natural language processing approaches for mapping CVEs, CWEs, they frankly are quite good at just simply doing a straight mapping from the description to the, to the leaf, especially the leaf nodes of CWE. And they do a fairly good job of doing that. At the same time, though, if we have that structure available to us, it seems like that structure can actually be leveraged to getting at some of these corner cases. And so that we can kind of start to include those cases that might not have a lot of exemplar data available to them. So anyway, I mean, this is kind of a long answer, but, I feel like, AI and ML are just, all over the place in this field. Certainly in CWE could be at the heart of that. But when we think about structurally how we're going to use it going forward and then how it's going to relate to these different things, I feel like that structure will have to be, we should think about how it's going to relate to these applications. And sometimes I think it's going to be more useful, and especially when you're, getting into these corner cases. But sometimes, I mean, the AI stuff, sees the world quite differently, and they'll have a hard time understanding that structure.
Absolutely. Chris, I do want to recognize you for to address this topic as well, and I know you've your team has done tremendous work in what you call your version of Watson and the training model and some lessons learned that came out of that. So if you'd like to also share your thoughts on this topic, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So it's not going to be not a very long description. So we did do a lot of work using Watson to try and do some natural language processing on the CVE descriptions. And while it's resulted in some good guidance, I guess you could say, based off the result set that we get there, that our analysts do use on as part of the work that they do. It really ended up pointing out mostly the fundamental issue that information from upstream providers is really limited in some data sets. When you're relying on things like trying to get just the NIST 19, it becomes very easy because those were all extremely high level. But once you start going a little bit deeper, you end up running into issues where you would really like to have something a little bit more specific, but you can't for whatever reason based off the information provided, and you end up mapping to something a little bit higher level. So I mean, that's generally been our experience using the Watson to try and do those mappings. If we could ingest, say, the more detailed information, that's available outside of just the generic CVE descriptions, for instance, we would have much better results. But that becomes very difficult to scale. And that's I'd say, and so that's about where it landed. I think we got to a point where we were getting like 70 to 90% confidence in some areas, but then as we adjusted the 1003 view to become much more granular, that's shifted, and we haven't really adjusted to that new data set quite yet.
Okay, I think there is a question for you in the chat, Chris. Is there an outreach plan to incentivize or encourage the participation to contribute?
Oh, sorry, I was writing out a text chat for that one, but real quick, there is basically any of the participants within the CVE program, so CNAs, would be aware of the possible vocabulary and things that are going into the new CVE JSON that's being worked on, and all of the different communication mechanisms within that. And then there are secondary groups outside of the CNAs for authorized data publishers, which would basically be organizations that would like to provide extra information and, say gap fill. So if anyone is interested in those kind of things, they would want to reach out to the CVE program and see if they could qualify under that authorized data provider if they weren't a CNA. A little out of scope of the summit though, so probably all I should say about that right now.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think since we're touching on the theme of collaboration, community outreach, I think we can. This is our last, agenda item we have is to just basically what are some ways that the CWE team can work with your organizations in improving CWE and CWE Top 25 in future. Jeremy, would you like to share your thoughts on that?
I mean, frankly, I think that there's, MITRE's doing a lot of outreach right now with the, I mean, we have the, I think that the CWE Social Working Group on hardware issues has been, very interesting. And I think from that we could, I think with some structure we could start to address these issues of what are the different topics which would be appropriate for maybe some subcategories for top 25 lists, or maybe top 10 lists really with no subcategories, and how that would work and how that would be, would there be ways that we could use a semi-automated approach with some of these risk frameworks, especially in cases where, so we're not using purely expert input and but we might not have the support from labeled CVEs to populate them. But yeah, I think that's a, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of outreach going on right now, and I think that we should kind of shape it towards those. Now that, especially in hardware, which I think is like this big growth area, now that a lot of the, I think that the number of new CWEs is kind of tapering off. I mean, this is a good time to start thinking about, how would we adapt top 25 in that context, and then how would we adapt top 25 for these other, important areas like mobile, for example.
Yeah, so speaking of hardware, I think there's like hardware SIG calls that happen, and then the team, CW team is also supporting that. And so there are some plans on what would that look like for something like a top 25 list or top 10 or whatever that would be, right? So there's some, I think we have some folks on the call as well that if they have better understanding, they can feel free to speak up or write it in the chat.
I'll just share my perspective. I think if we came out with a list of top 25 CWEs for mobile devices, top 25 for medical devices, top 25 CWEs for voting devices, you would get a lot of attention by people saying, you've predetermined for me, and they're going to go look for that. And you would actually see that being put on contracts.
Rushi, you have a question, a hand raised by Alex who.
Okay. Yeah, I think Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, along the lines of what Joe just mentioned, if we could have domain specific, that would be a huge step forward. But I want to get to the devil's in the details part of it, right? So right now, that data doesn't exist, right? So where do we as an industry collect the data? And this raises issues that I personally feel are related to the filing of CVEs and the calculation of CVSS scores, right? So when you're filling out a CVSS score, part of the calculation is, what level of network access do you need, right? But what if you're talking about an application that's not even on the network? So we're not collecting the data about the genealogy of the application or the genealogy of the component. So is it possible as part of the CVE process, when CVEs are filed, to collect additional metadata in the future that would then pair with CVSS scores and also provide the information we would need to calculate things like CWE top 25s for domain-specific information.
So
2 times we released the top 25, it was not based on use. It was a lot of smart people getting together to predetermine it. So Alex, you're good in that space, but to say we need to wait till we get better data, I'd suggest to you that we can understand weaknesses that are most applicable for given technologies deployed in a particular environment. That you could, use the common weakness scoring system to help create that vignette. It's not rocket science, and to simply wait for let's collect years of collecting data before we do it. I'd say it's we don't need to wait that long.
I think that's a totally valid point, Joe. I'm not saying we need to wait, but if we want to make it more scientific in the future, we need more data.
I agree, absolutely.
yeah, and I mean we can start just the way we did back in the days, right? With surveys and reach back to community and get that data or information from them, and then using as other mechanisms we have in place to derive a list while we look to build up the data to do this automated capacity in the future. So I think that's certainly a possibility. I think we're running out of time, so I do want to acknowledge Chris to also chime in on this topic before we end the call.
Well, I mean, so again, NVD is in a slightly different position than I'd say a lot of people on this call, where we're kind of looking at the information after the fact. So to Alex's point, I would very much just like to have more detailed information available. Even if it's not necessarily exactly what folks are looking for immediately, something that lets us get closer and closer to a better data set just makes everything work better for everybody. And while CWE can take steps like Joe was mentioning to kind of guide things in a specific direction before we have all the data available, having organizations willing to participate and provide that data in the first place is really a very useful long-term goal that kind of helps out in ways that maybe aren't even seen today. We may look for something later, and having that data available to look back on can be incredibly useful.